Hi Spring fans, welcome to another installment of Spring Tips. In this installment, we're going to look at reactive views. And what I mean by that is we're going to look at regular HTTP, but with an eye towards taking advantage of reactive programming to build more interactive dynamic views. And this isn't something that we need to do. I mean, I think you can gather from previous videos how to do some of what we're going to talk about, namely service and events and WebSockets. But there's some more possibilities here. And the reason I want to talk about all this is because I feel like there's a class of applications that exists where we'd like to have a little bit more dynamic behavior on the page without having to completely go full client side, right? And so these are sort of what I imagine as, or I think of as departmental kind of applications. There are applications that are, maybe not as dynamic as Gmail, right? I mean, there's a lot of applications for which this is true, and I think we've kind of there's a pendulum swing, right? At this point, I think it's fair to say that client-side programming, JavaScript programming, is vastly more complicated than anything I can ask you to do in this on the server side with Java and Spring, right? So at this point, there's this just insane amount of code that has to get generated and transpiled and compiled and all that stuff just to be able to take advantage of projects like Angular and React. And I've even used Angular, and there's a nice library called Vue.js, which is nice as well. I mean, a lot of good options out there, and I'm a fan. But if all you're trying to do is to add a little bit of dynamic behavior to a page, then that might be a bit overkill, especially if you don't have the skills. And so in previous videos, I've talked about Vaadin, for example. That's a component model based way of generating markup and DOM elements and pages and CSS and all that stuff, all from within a Swing, the UI framework Swing-like component model that in turn transpiles into JavaScript components, right? It's a very interesting approach. And that's fine, and I think that's okay if you really want more dynamic HTML and all that stuff. But if you just want if you just have an HTML page with good CSS and all that stuff, and you just want to add some dynamic behavior, you can get a lot done if you just know a little bit of JavaScript. And I think this is easier for a lot of people than going the opposite direction, right? I suspect this is going to be easier for people like me who have a fair bit of skills on the server side, but who aren't fluent in the client side, like my friend Matt Rabel. So for these people who are fluent, who are just native in that client-side world, and who don't mind managing the ever sort of changing landscape that is that world, it's a natural thing to move to the client side. And as you use frameworks like React and Angular, they start to take over progressively more and more of the things that get shown on the screen. And so at that point, Spring becomes a very useful way to stand up HTTP services, right? You have WebSockets, you have HTTP-based APIs, REST APIs, but you consume all that from the browser client, the JavaScript client. And then, if you start using Angular and React, the work of actually rendering a view, including the markup, gets buried in the JavaScript code. And of course, this creates a very dynamic experience, but it means that you now have a thing that is purely JavaScript. All the CSS, all the DOM elements, all the HTML, all the markup, all the everything is actually just materialized thanks to JavaScript code that runs when the page loads. Which of course search engines can't necessarily glom onto. They can't seize what's happening there. They need the page itself so they can index it. And so there's been a trend. We've gone to we see in the client-side world that people are, when possible, they take their client-side renderer and use the same thing on the server side. And these are so-called isomorphic applications. And I think these are kind of interesting in of themselves. They're applications that render using static sort of templates on the server side, but then they're also built. They're also built in such a way that the same template, the same view, is being built on the client with exactly the same inputs, the same markup, the same everything, the same template. It's just that now it's being regenerated, it's being updated on the client, and that's being used to update the HTML page that's already been loaded. So the effect is that you've got this statically pre-rendered buffer of strings that gets sent down from the server to the client, and that loads super fast. There's no computation required to load the markup. And then you have the same templating library, the same view logic being used on the client to then render a JavaScript version of that, to use JavaScript to then render a series of DOM nodes that looks exactly the same as what you got when you rendered it on the server side. And the benefit, of course, is that you get really fast loads, and then you can progressively enhance these pages. Now, that only happens, of course, when you offload all your views to client-side JavaScript. That's only a requirement when you do that. But if you have server-side views, if you have server-side templates, and you just want to add some dynamic behavior, it seems it seems a bridge too far for me to go all the way to the client side and then try and get the client side to have the same rendering engine. Why not just use the server side rendering engine to render the page and then update the parts that you care about? And this is not an old idea, of course. I mean, you've no doubt, some of you will remember the days before what we used to call Ajax, right? Now we just call it HTTP requests that you can make from the browser, but before we called it Ajax, and before that, in 2004-ish, we talked about something called DHTML, and I think the distinction there was DHTML was just sort of dynamic pages with no sort of discussion or understanding of how these pages were communicating with a back end. And finally it became possible for browser clients to make calls to back-end services. That is to say, they were no longer constrained to their sandbox, and this allowed them to drive the updates of the page from information on the server, and we call that Ajax. And I think there's still a lot of applications for which Ajax, that very simple model of having a regular page that you update dynamically, could be useful. Certainly if you want to get something out of the box up and running quick. So what we're going to do is we're going to build a little application, and we're going to use the reactive web support here, right? So let's say reactive views, all right? We're going to use Lombok. We're going to use the reactive web support, and we're going to use Timeleaf, all right? That's a server-side templating engine. I hit generate, and I'm going to open this up here. Now we have a brand new application. And we're just going to sort of approach the same problem a number of different ways. First of all, let's try ye old SSE. Okay, we're going to create an SSE endpoint. And so all I'm going to do, I'm not going to, I've done other videos on each of these things, so I'm not going to linger too much on that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a producer that produces updates. It's just going to be a publisher that produces updates every, let's say, second. Okay, and so it'll be a Spring Bean that produces updates of type greetings. Okay, string message and publisher of greet string name, and we'll say flux.fromStream stream.generate new supplier, and we're going to say just return a new greeting. So, and the greeting will have a message, and so I'll give it a constructor. All right, there's that, no works constructor, and we'll say hello name at, we'll give it the time so that we have an idea of when this is being done. All right, good stuff. That's a lambda, very good. And of course I want to stagger that by introducing a 1 second delay so that we have a hope of being able to follow it with our with the naked eye. Okay, so that'll be a Spring Bean. Good, so that's our bean. Now we're going to create a service and event view, and we're just going to create a service and event stream, SSE greetings controller. All right, and this controller is just a regular Spring MVC or Spring Webflux. In this case, we're using the reactive web support here. And again, what I've done is I've created a stream that's it's a value that will keep updating, and so it'll keep producing new values, new updates in perpetuity forever, every 1 second. And so we're going to use that. We're going to create a view here. We're going to say create a view of SSE greetings. All right. And you know what? Arguably, we probably don't want the name. I'm not sure if that'll actually buy us anything, so I'll get rid of that. Actually, we can have the name. Why not? Let's have the name. So we'll keep the name, and in the SSE page, we'll say name. So we'll say publisher of greet, and we'll use that as a path variable, string name. All right. And in order to do this, I'm going to inject the greetings producer like so. You can create the constructor, or you can start to do as I've been doing more often recently is just use Lombok's required args constructor. I finally gave in. It is just too simple not to do it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say when somebody calls this endpoint, living at that endpoint, we're going to send back a content type of text event stream like that, and we'll say producer.greet, passing in the name, the path variable in the name. All right. Now, how do we use that from a client? Well, that's simple. Let's just create a page here in the directory called static. So we're going to create a static assets directory. Spring Boot will automatically serve anything in the static directory to the client, and we're going to call this sse.html, and we'll just write a smidge of something that I'm not really proud of, but hey, you know, I do it for you. We're going to write some JavaScript. Okay, so add event listener, load function e, and we're going to have an update. ID is going to be update, and we're going to say var es equals new event source. So HTTP localhost 8080, and the endpoint we're going to call is this one here, greetings names, SSE greetings names. And we have to provide a string for the name itself. And so to do that, I'll ask for a name, but I'll ask the user for a name to greet. Okay, who should we greet? Okay, prompt, pass that in. All right, and as events come in, we're going to use the onMessage event to then update our DOM element, and our DOM element is update. So we're going to say var update equals document.getElementById update. We'll say update.inner HTML equals what do we want to do? I want to say this plus message plus this. All right, a little bit of markup. I'm not loving that. Maybe I could have actually had a nested element. It could have been h1, and then inside that I could have updated that. But you can imagine for any kind of non-trivial thing, you know, you might get more complex objects than just greetings objects. So you know, you're going to want to take that data and then build the DOM tree around it dynamically, right? And so you can imagine how that would work. Actually, what I'm going to get back in this case, the message data, is going to be a publisher of greetings. I don't really want that, do I? I just want names, right? How you know, I want the messages rather. So I'll get the message. So I'm going to say greet name map greeting get message. So now I'm sending a publisher of strings back, and at least that will work correctly. If I put it in between h1, it won't be some sort of, you know, it won't be h1 and then JSON representation of a greeting and then h1. It'll just be h1 and then the message. All right. So, but you can see you have to get both sides to agree on that. Okay, let's just try that out. This is a Spring Boot 2.2x application, so I'll use lazy initialization. One thing I didn't do, but which I should have done back in the initializer, is to use the dev tools. And so now, with that done, I can compile, start the application. All right, it's up and running. Let's try that again. Get the shake off the first compile. Okay, now we're cooking. Now it's up to speed a little bit. So I've got an application. It's up and running. We're going to go see the page at SSE. Oh, sorry, we call it sse.html, right? So sse.html. And we're going to greet Spring fans. Oops, Spring fans. Did I make a JavaScript error? SSE 500. Whoa. Multi-value. Oh, it's a REST controller, friends. It's a REST controller. I should know that. You know, I can think of a lot of people who know that. I should be one of them. That's okay. I'll just use DevTools to restart. And there it is. And we're going to say Spring fans. All right, and there we go. So every second, it's going to get a new update, and we're updating this element on the client side, and not so bad, right? And the actual markup is being done on the client. We're actually modifying the client this way. All right, that works fine, I guess. Now, another way to do this is to use WebSockets. So Let's do WebSockets. We'll do WebSocket configuration. And in the WebSocket code, it's just going to be a configuration class. And I'm going to create a bean of simple URL handler mapping. And this is going to be a thing that has information that Spring needs to know about, Spring Webflux needs to know about in order to properly mount your endpoint for consumption to the outside world. Okay, so there's this map.of, and we'll say ws greetings. Right? We need to provide a WebSocket handler. And the WebSocket handler we're going to define in a minute. That's where our business logic lives, but we need that. Okay, so map of WSH. Alrighty. Why are you upset? Set URL map. Well, oh, I forgot to update this to 11. That's why. All right, so Maven import. Okay, there we go. I am losing my mind clearly, but at least I was able to figure this out. Now we need a WebSocket handler adapter. Okay, like so. And we need finally the WebSocket handler, which is our business logic. This is the thing that we're going to create that actually produces the response, the stream, basically. And in order to do that, we're going to create our greetings. We're going to inject our greetings producer and use that to define this WebSocket handler. Okay, so the job of WebSocket handler is very simple. When the client, the JavaScript client, connects to the server, there's an exchange that goes on, an upgrade from HTTP to WebSockets, and then finally a session is created, and then that's when we get involved. The server gives us a reference to the session, and we can use that to say, okay, what did the client send to us? So let's receive the data. What we get is a publisher of WebSocket message, and for each WebSocket message, I want to unpack the message and get the text, and that's actually a publisher of names to greet. Well, of course, there's only going to be one value, but it's still a publisher, right? Now, what I want to do, I want to take that names to greet and turn it into a stream of greetings, right, to send back to the client, an updated stream of greetings. So I'm going to say names to greet dot flat map, taking in the name to greet in question, and using producer to greet that name to greet, and that's going to give me a publisher of greetings. Okay, response greetings. All right, now that's good, but I actually want the text of that, so I'm going to say response greetings dot map gr.getMessage. All right, and that'll give me a string of string responses. All right, and finally from there, what I want to do is I want to send that as a series of text messages. That is to say, not like an SMS, but like a WebSocket text message. So we say string responses dot map string greeting session dot text message, passing in that, and that gives us a publisher of WebSocket message, which we can send back to the client like this. Okay, now all together. Now, how do we, what do we normally do? Well, first of all, clean that up, get rid of the intermediate variables because they add nothing here. Okay, good stuff. So there's our greetings publisher. What we're doing is we're saying receive the data, map it, turn it into a publisher, etc. It's actually fairly elegant if you think about it. I kind of like it. Actually, I really like it. And of course, this can be a Lambda as well. So there's our whole WebSocket based application that takes input and responds to output. There is no path variables here, obviously. There's no path variables for the WebSocket endpoint, but that's okay because we can, service and events are a unidirectional communication protocol. WebSockets are bidirectional, so I can just send data from the WebSocket client, get the data in, respond to it, and so on. All right, so with that, we've got our WebSocket handler. Now we need a page. So let's create a new file here. .html, HTML, body, script, and basically the same structure as SSE actually, if you think about it. So we're going to do this, but some things are different. First of all, We've got the update element. That's fine, right? We had that before. We want the name to greet, but we're not using this. We're not using event source. We're using WebSocket. So WebSocket, and the endpoint that we're going to call is here. It's called WS Greetings. So we go back to our WebSocket code, and it's not HTTP here, it's WS. That's a new protocol, right? It's a different protocol. And we don't need the name. So now we have, so now we need to get the data. We need to get the name to greet. In order to do that, we're going to ask a question. We're going to say, when this socket is opened, let's send a request. We're going to say ws.send this name, right? The name that we've prompted for. And then when the data comes back in the onMessage call, and that's exactly the same as before, when that comes back, then we'll update the HTML using message.data. And the same thing applies, right? For our WebSocket code, we're just sending strings. We're not sending the JSON. We could, but we don't need to. All right, so now we can do this. Okay, so that's ws.html. Here you are. Spring WebSocket fans. Okay, so totally different technology. We're now using interactive bidirectional WebSocket APIs, but we're getting the same effect. You can see that this is updating at roughly every second, right? We're sending back down that data back to the client, and this is live, right? That's the thing. That's the reason you would care about these kinds of things, is liveliness. What if I have chat messages or stock tickers or a clock, in this case a ticking clock which has a friendly message or something like that? Whatever, right? Anything you can imagine being updated all the time. And again, I staggered the results by 1 second, but there's no reason it couldn't be a new value every nanosecond. I mean, assuming your browser doesn't mind creating DOM nodes and destroying them that quickly. And by the way, if they do care about that, that's a good reason for you to care about things like React, which actually creates a virtual DOM and can minimize garbage collection for objects created in the DOM itself, because that's not cheap. But okay, so we've got this. Now, in this case, I end up getting into the business of creating HTML markup, and it's pretty easy to get away with some amazing things if you're using, update.innerHTML. I remember a time when innerHTML wasn't supported in all browsers, and so in order to update the DOM, you'd actually have to create DOM elements. You'd say document.createElement, and then you'd get a node, and then you'd assign attributes to it, and then you'd append it to a parent node, and you ended up doing a lot of builder code in JavaScript just to modify the DOM, because you couldn't trust innerHTML to work consistently. Those days are long since past for the very large majority of us. But that said, you will probably find yourself in some situation where you're doing things to the DOM to modify it and to get a user interface going inside of JavaScript code. And I don't want to. I just don't. I'd rather go to production. So one interesting opportunity here is a feature that's unique in Timeleaf, which supports reactive sort of server-sent event updated views. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a Timeleaf view controller. Okay. It's going to be a Timeleaf view greetings controller. And what this is going to do, it's going to be a regular controller, not a REST controller. It's going to load, a greetings page. It could be anything. Greetings.jsp, greetings.php. Don't do that. Or view, whatever. Or you might remember the old struts do, right? And I'm going to render the initial view here. And all that's going to do is it's going to render a greetings HTML template. And this is a Timeleaf template. Now, Timeleaf is a server-side framework. It's a server-side rendering engine, rather, a templating engine that you can use to render pages. So we're going to create a new folder here. Spring Boot will automatically render or make available. It'll mount all the views that are in source main resources templates. It'll auto-configure those as being part of the views if it finds a templating engine like Timeleaf or Velocity or FreeMarker or whatever on the class path. So there's static, there's templates, and we're going to create a new view here called greetings.html. Now this is a page whose contents will be updated by the server side, right? It'll actually be parsed by the server side and then pre-processed like JSP, but with much more elegance and speed, okay? and no inline Java code. So what we're doing is we're going to say ID equals greetings block, okay? And then inside this, I'm going to visit each record in a stream of data. Okay, so I'm going to use an attribute for Timeleaf. So for each greeting in the greetings attributes, or attribute, the model attribute, just render that string, greeting. Okay, there you are. And that's it. That's my markup. I do need a little bit of JavaScript. Oh, I should put that inside the body. That's important. Oh, it is in the body. Yeah, okay, that's fine. So I want some markup. But what's important here is that I'm gonna keep this, like all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna send a text message, and yet I'll still keep the styling, right? I'm not gonna modify any of that in code. So if I did color, right? Color, you know, red or whatever, royal blue, green, right? Okay, so there's green. Green. Okay, so now I've got the markup in the template itself, not in the server side. All I'm going to send is just a regular text body, and you can imagine how this would render. The first time this would render, if you've ever seen Timeleaf or any other sort of view templating engine, I've created a model attribute here, and that's going to be loaded into memory on the producer side, on the server. And then the server is going to take this template, it's going to merge the model attributes in the template with the model elements in the model, which is just a glorified map, it's a dictionary basically, on the server side, and it's going to evaluate the contents of that. What does this template mean in context or in light of that data in the model, and it's going to render it out into a string buffer, and it's going to send that directly to the client. Well, of course, we can't do that here, right? We have a view whose data is going to be fed by this thing that's going to produce new values forever. So we can't wait for the end. We can't exhaust the greetings model attribute just to render this page. So what we want is a nice feature in Timeleaf that allows us to do service and event based views, which I think is super cool. So we do need a little bit of code. We say window.addEventListener, load function, and var es equals new event source. And what we're going to do is we're going to connect to another event source here on the Timeleaf view endpoint. So I'm going to create this one. We're going to say value equals greetings view.do. Okay. And we're going to expect a query parameter. Okay. And then the produces the service. It'll be a service and event stream, like so. But we're going to render a page. Render updated view. So the client will actually look at this. So we're going to use a special syntax here. Render the template called greetings, but in particular render this block. Not the whole thing, just this block. It's going to reevaluate that block. In order to do that, you have to have Timeleaf, right? You're using Timeleaf here. So I'm going to create a model attribute, and it's going to be a model attribute for this attribute here, greetings. And the greetings itself will be data from my publisher. So greetings equals, and we'll inject the greetings producer. Good stuff. This dot producer dot greet, and of course we need the view. We need the name. So I'll express a request param here, string name. So it'll be question mark name equals and then something, and we'll inject that there. So we're going to pass that in, and that'll give us a string of elements, right? And actually, in this case, because I have that, because I'm just using standard server-side generated things, I can actually render the message here. I can actually say greetings dot what do we call it? Greetings producer greeting message. So I think we can just do that. We can just say greetings dot message. Okay, and that'll dereference the element on the server side. At least it should. Pretty sure it will. So we have this endpoint. Okay, it's a stream. In order to create that data, there we go. We're actually okay with that. Okay. So what our client is going to do is it's going to call this from the event source. So localhost 8080, like that. It's going to say es.addEventListener load message function e, and we're going to say message dot data. That's the markup, the service, the updated markup, and we're just going to say let's update that update block. Okay, so update block equals document dot get element by ID greetings block, and we're going to say update block dot inner HTML equals the data. Right? So I'm telling the server side, hey, process this block of text, this HTML, on the server side. Evaluate it in context with this template, and then send that back to the client. Well, of course, the template on the server side is going to have this reactive stream of data, and of course, I want to send that back to the client. So I can't actually use a regular publisher. I almost got away with it. I forgot to change this. I have to have a variable, which is a new reactive. This is where the magic happens, like this. And so what that's going to do is it's going to reevaluate this reactive stream after one element has been emitted. This is the buffer. Okay, so I'll say variable, and I'll add that there, and that's what actually allows this to work. So it's a server-side view. I'm returning a string to resolve the view, and yet it's a server-side event stream, right? You saw me do that before with a more like HTTP service API, but this is a view. It's very different, and that should just work. Now let's see if I've got everything in place. I've got the template greetings.html. It's going to render that. When you go to the Timeleaf view configuration, it's going to go to greetings.do, or we're going to call this greetings updates. Okay, and we're going to go to our page here, updates. All right, let's restart that. Okay, good stuff. So what do we call this? We called this, that's WS. We don't want that one. We want the greetings.do, I think, right? So Timeleaf greetings.do. Greetings updates.do 400. What's the error? Oh, I need a parameter. Name equals Spring fans. Is that not 400? Bad request. Greetings.do rendering the view called greetings. That's this right here. And let's just try restarting it just for the heck of it. What is the issue here, friends? Name is not present. I think it is. I think it is. Oh, it's... Well, no, that's not right. Okay, so where... Let's try that again. That's a good point. We do need that in the update endpoint, don't we? Yeah, we need it here. Okay, so where do we get that? Let's try that again. So here, in our JavaScript code, in the greetings template, we need to say name equals and then give it a name. So var name equals windows.prompt or window prompt, who should we greet, right? Same thing as before. And obviously you would do better to HTML encode or URL encode these variables, but hashtag YOLO. Okay, and okay, command F9. I don't know if it started. Let's try that again. Just restart. Okay. There we go. So spring them. Cool, huh? And you can see what's happening over the network. So here's the request and the response, query string, and we're getting text event stream, and the stream that's coming back is actually the markup itself as rendered on the server side. So you could do artificially complex business logic on the server side. You could, render out objects, and you can see it says hello Springdom. I dereferenced the name, but the client side has no idea about the structure of the JSON object. It's only ever on the server side that we dereference that property and then load it into the template, right? So you're not exposing any of the JavaScript. You're not JSONifying your objects only to then use them in building up the markup for the elements in the DOM. So I think that's a pretty cool feature. Good job, Thymeleaf. I like that. That's actually really nice. And you can imagine stock tickers and chat messages and whatever. A lot of things that might be easier if you could just turn it into a stream like that. I'm sure there's other things you could do that are interesting like this. It's possible to get this kind of effect, kind of with a thing that Dr. Dave Sayers working on or had working at one point for FreeMarker, I think. I'm not sure if that's anywhere in any kind of project, but if you ping me, I'll be able to find it, and maybe he can brush it off or share it with people, or can point you into the right direction. Either way, good stuff. I hope you enjoyed this, and as always, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.